Of course, I was a little crazy. These words belong to the American Rollin' Free. He said them after setting a speed record on a motorcycle in the U.S. on the flat surface of the Bonneville Salt Flats. This madman, lying on a motorcycle wearing only swimming trunks, beach sandals, and a helmet in 1948, hit 241 kilometers per hour on a Vincent Black Lightning motorcycle. At that time, Raleigh's achievement was not an absolute world record, but it looked absolutely insane. And to achieve it, he needed not only motivation, but also a pinch of hatred towards Harley-Davidson. It so happened that in 1923, the company from Milwaukee deceived Rollin when he was competing on their motorcycle. Raleigh didn't forget this incident, and in '48 he broke the record of Joe Petrelli, who competed on a Harley-Davidson and whose record had stood for 11 years. I decided to start this episode with this story. Motorcycle speed records are an extremely vivid page in history. Stories of individual daredevil racers, stories of teams of engineers and mechanics who prepared and created the machines, stories of great luck and frustrating failures. In this video, we will take a look at New Zealander Burt Munro, find out why an American aviator installed a V8 engine on a bicycle, and try to understand what Rocky Robinson felt when he crashed on his Streamliner at a speed of about 515 kilometers per hour, and while inside the motorcycle rolled over 16 times. And we'll find out how a loophole in the AFIM rules allowed this jet-powered vehicle to be classified as a motorcycle with a sidecar. Join me for a few words about motorcycle speed records. You're on the Krasmodo channel. Enjoy watching.
To a new land speed record of 265 miles per hour.
His best time, 140 miles an hour, 30 less than the record.
240, only 5 miles an hour under the present record.
Speed and the various ways to measure it have been an integral part of human civilization for probably as long as it has existed. Speed is everywhere. It probably all started back in ancient times when primitive hunters chased after the megafauna of the Ice Age. There were definitely faster individuals and slower ones. And the competitive nature, it's in the blood of Homo sapiens. Later, humans domesticated a number of animals, and in addition to running competitions, there were all sorts of horse races, chariot races, and so on. People also competed to see who was faster in boats, on skis, and so on. In the 18th and 19th centuries, progress picked up speed, and humanity gained access to technical inventions like the bicycle, locomotive, car, motorcycle, motorboat, and airplane. And the eternal argument about who is faster spread to these fields as well. It's hard to say when the first motorcycle speed record was set. Logically, the first motorcycle ever built, once it accelerated to any speed, no matter how minimal, automatically became the record holder. That's exactly what happened. Yes, many consider Gottlieb Daimler the father of the first motorcycle, and yes, it was the first motorcycle equipped with an internal combustion engine. However, even before Daimler, steam-powered motorcycles had been created. In 1867, American Sylvester Howard Roper attached a small steam engine to a bone shaker iron bicycle. Sylvester was obsessed with one question: how fast his creation would go. I have no doubt that Frenchman Guillaume Perrault was asking himself the same question in Paris that same year, when he also converted a Pierre Michaud-designed bicycle to steam power. But it was Sylvester Roper who became the first speed demon of the motorcycle world and its first martyr. Roper is the true patron saint of motorcycles, and he died for the same sin that stains bikers in every era: the thirst for speed. On June 1st, 1896, the elderly Roper, he was 73 at the time, was asked to demonstrate the latest version of his self-propelled machine. His motorcycle had a reputation as the fastest machine on wheels, capable of climbing any hill and outrunning any horse. Sylvester was invited to perform at the Charles River Speedway, a wooden bicycle racing track in Massachusetts. He kicked all the cyclists' asses, reaching speeds of up to 60 kilometers per hour. After several laps, Roper was seen to wobble and slow down. As he approached his support team, He collapsed dead into his son's arms. Sylvester didn't crash. Most likely, he had a heart attack from excitement. Roper became the first motorcyclist ever to die and unofficially the first record holder. But still, the first motorcycle records would come once the industry developed a bit and a number of the first motorcycle brands appeared. The first official record, approved by the International Motorcycling Federation, also known as FIM, was set in 1920 when Gene Walker, riding an Indian motorcycle, accelerated in Daytona Beach to a speed of 167.56 kilometers per hour. But before this event, there were a number of unofficial records. Friends, such lengthy episodes require a tremendous amount of work. Gathering material and putting it all together is a difficult and time-consuming task. And if you end up liking the video as you watch it, don't be lazy and help the YouTube algorithms promote this story. Give it a like, write a comment, and share it with your friends. This is the simplest and best way to support my channel. Thank you. The pioneers of motorcycle manufacturing quickly recognized the effectiveness of participating in races and speedruns as a tool for attracting potential buyers and promoting their brand. Who wouldn't want to buy the fastest motorcycle? The first widely recognized record belongs to the American Glenn Hammond Curtis, a motorcycle engine builder, designer, and pioneer of American aviation. Back in 1903, on a motorcycle of his own design with a V-twin engine of 1-liter displacement and 4 horsepower, in Yonkers, New York, Glenn reached a speed of 103 kilometers per hour. That was the average speed over a distance of 1 mile. Just a year later, in 1904, Curtis built a more powerful racing motorcycle. Its twin produced 5 horsepower. He took it to Daytona Beach to participate in speed trials. He broke all the existing records at distances from 2 to 10 miles, showing an average speed of 108.48 kilometers per hour over the 10-mile stretch. The early achievements of the pioneers in motorcycle engineering are impressive. They didn't have teams of engineers and designers. They didn't have dynamometers, computers for calculations, and so on. Everything was done purely out of enthusiasm. Spare parts and components were made by hand, and any miscalculation could prove fatal during subsequent equipment tests. By now, the world has come a long way. Now, if a part on your equipment breaks down, you don't have to run to the shed, pour iron into a sand mold, and spend the next week filing the part by hand. Already in that same year, 1905, Curtis would be outdone by another mustached daredevil. Meet the Frenchman, Henri Sissac. The speed race took place on July 27, 1905 as part of the Brighton Speed Trials competition in Brighton, United Kingdom. Sissac covered 1 kilometer in 25.6 seconds. This means his average speed was 140.6 kilometers per hour. Note that the competition was held in the flying kilometer format, which means the start happens from a standstill, from a stationary position. It turns out that at the finish, Sissac was going at a full 160, maybe even 170 kilometers per hour. According to the final results, Henri confidently outperformed all his opponents and became the record holder. Sissac competed on a motorcycle from Peugeot with a 1.5-liter V-shaped engine producing 14 horsepower. This engine weighed 27 kilograms, and the whole motorcycle weighed 50. Henri Sissac was not a newcomer. He had participated in many races practically since motorcycles first appeared, as shown by this newspaper clipping from December 26, 1901. Henri Sissac's record stood until August 5, 1911, when Jacques Desrosiers reached a speed of 142.84 kilometers per hour at Brooklands. However, the race format was a bit different, and some sources believe that Sissac remained the record holder for some time. Henri had a great love for speed, which extended to 4 wheels as well, and unfortunately, it was at this speed that he passed away. He died at the 1908 French Grand Prix. He was driving a Panhard car at 145 kilometers per hour when a wheel came off and he crashed into the trees. Let's get back to the pioneer of American aviation, Do you think Glenn Curtiss would have been satisfied with his 1905 achievement? Not at all. Already in 1906, he was diligently developing a motorcycle that would forever etch Curtiss's name into the annals of history. By the end of 1906, the machine was ready, essentially a bicycle with a motor, as were almost all motorcycles of that era. But what an engine it had! It was a V-shaped 8-cylinder engine designed by Glenn, with a displacement of 269 cubic inches. In standard units, that's 4,408 cubic centimeters, or 4.4 liters. It produced about 36 to 40 horsepower at 1,800 revolutions per minute and had an insane amount of torque. Originally, the engine was built for aviation, but Curtiss figured that this unit would allow him to set a land speed record. The motorcycle weighed about 125 kilograms, and its design had no gearbox and no brakes. After all, Glenn was planning to go fast. The torque was transmitted directly from the crankshaft to the rear wheel via a drive shaft. No chain or belt of that time could handle that power. In January 1907, the moment of truth arrived. Curtiss arrived with his motorcycle in Ormond Beach, Florida. With the help of a car, the motorcycle was accelerated to about 65 kilometers per hour, after which it continued moving on its own. The track itself consisted of 3 parts. The first 2 miles were for acceleration, 1 mile for recording the speed, and 1 mile to stop. On January 24, 1907, Glenn Curtiss reached a mind-blowing speed for that time during a test run, 219.31 kilometers per hour. Several people who observed the timed mile and recorded the time came to this conclusion. The number was obtained by averaging the results. During the motorcycle's second run, its engine specifically started to break down, and the speed dropped to 145 kilometers per hour. Curtiss couldn't continue the runs due to the malfunction, and since the best result was achieved during the test run, the record was not officially recognized. However, this did not stop Glenn from becoming the fastest man on Earth. You heard right, the fastest man on Earth. The result of 219.31 kilometers per hour achieved on this V8 motorcycle was the absolute, albeit unofficial, record among all machines created by man at that time. No car or railway locomotive, not even early aircraft, had ever reached such a speed. Among the general public, by the way, there was a myth that supposedly, upon reaching a speed of 200 kilometers per hour, the human body wouldn't withstand it, and the person's lungs would burst. Curtiss's record lasted for 4 years among all types of vehicles, and another motorcycle only surpassed this speed in 1930. Glenn Curtiss's motorcycle is still carefully preserved and on display at the Smithsonian Museum. Let's take a few minutes to step away from the racers, their machines, and the speed records, although the latter will come in handy for us. We need to understand a bit about how, even in the early years of the 20th century, it was possible to measure speed quite accurately during record runs. For some viewers, the accuracy of the results back then is unclear, and some believe that since motorcycles didn't even have speedometers, the results are highly questionable and can be considered worthless. But that's a misconception. Fairly soon, the first racers and the relevant authorities responsible for recording race results came to understand that it was practically impossible to determine the exact speed at a specific moment in time. The technological level of that period simply didn't allow for that, and they took a different approach. It was possible to measure the distance accurately and the time taken to cover that distance with sufficient precision. For example, as early as 1862, they were able to measure time with an accuracy of up to 1/5 of a second. And chronophotography, the prototype of the modern photo finish, appeared in 1887 when the French physician and physiologist Etienne Jules Marey invented a system that combined time measurement and image capture, the chronophotograph. In 1894, he also invented a slow-motion system that operated at a speed of 700 frames per second. Such achievements in science and technology made it possible to hold races in the format of the flying kilometer and the flying mile, starting from a standstill. At the finish line, specialists measured the time it took to cover the distance. In fact, Henri Césac set his record in this very format. At the same time, a format appeared where the racer would accelerate the vehicle to its limit over a certain distance and then pass through a control section at the highest possible speed. Here, two time measurements were required: the time of entry and the time of exit from the control section. So 1/100th of a kilometer in the race results of the first decade of the 20th century was absolutely normal. And by the 1930s, the accuracy would increase to thousandths of a kilometer. By 1928, there were already chronographs capable of measuring time with an accuracy of 1/100th of a second. Later on, timing devices only continued to develop. On the Bonneville Salt Flats, which has been the mecca of speed for many years, a computerized electronic system based on infrared emitters from Chronologic is installed on the track designated for runs, allowing time to be recorded with an accuracy of up to 1/1000th of a second. And yes, all records from the 1900s to this day are based on the average speed shown over a specific distance. The maximum speed at any given moment is usually somewhat higher. It also became clear fairly quickly to the record holders and the governing body, in our case that's FEM, that it was necessary to conduct two runs in opposite directions. That's because there's such a thing as wind, and if it blows in the same direction as the rider, it will help them reach a slightly higher speed, while for another record holder going against the wind, it will be a hindrance, and the result will be lower. It's precisely because of the wind that for about a century, record runs have been conducted on the track in both directions, and the runs must take place within no more than an hour so that the weather doesn't have time to change significantly. The final result is considered to be the arithmetic average of the average speed on the control section in both runs. If any of the run conditions are violated, the record will not be counted. A record is considered set if it exceeds the previous achievement by at least 1%. Let's get back to the records themselves. In this big video, I focus mainly on absolute speed records on motorcycles. Naturally, for the most part, these are the records that were successful, officially registered, and complied with the regulations in place at the time of the run. In reality, there are a lot of records. They differ by class. For example, the classification of runs by engine displacement appeared quite early. And how many attempts were there to break the maximum speed record that, for one reason or another, were unsuccessful? Too many to count. By the end of the 1910s, the International Motorcycling Federation, as the regulatory body for most competitions involving two-wheeled motor vehicles, was already mature enough to officially record speed records. And now we've come to Gene Walker and the first official record. Many people know about Burt Munro's fastest Indian, but that was not the first record on a motorcycle of this brand. Eugene Walker was a professional American racer, and he started out delivering mail on an Indian motorcycle as a young man. In 1920, Gene arrived at Daytona Beach on a 1-liter racing Indian. The timekeepers during his run on April 14th recorded a speed of 167.56 kilometers per hour, and until that moment, no one had officially gone faster on a motorcycle. Yes, there was Glenn Curtis, who in 1907 reached a crazy 219 kilometers per hour in some. But as you remember, that wasn't an official record, and the result was achieved during a test run. If you look at the chart of motorcyclist speeds, you can see a significant spike in 1907 and then a drop until 1930. Walker's result was extremely significant, but by 1923, American motorcycles had completely disappeared from world motorsport. Motorcycle competitions in the U.S. became focused on domestic events, many of which were strikingly different from those held worldwide. But that doesn't mean attempts to break the record stopped. Both Indian and Harley-Davidson competed for speed records. By the 1930s, engineers began to think about aerodynamics, experimenting with different fairing designs. In 1926, Johnny Seymour, riding an Indian with a fairing built by Oakland Indian dealer Hap Alzina, achieved a speed of 190 kilometers per hour. All these experiments, along with the U.S. speed record set in 1937 by Joe Petrelli on a modified Harley-Davidson knucklehead at 219.165 kilometers per hour gave Americans hope for breaking the world record. But that didn't happen. By that time, the Europeans had pulled ahead, particularly the British, and a little later, the Germans. And only 50 years after Gene Walker's achievement, in 1970 would an American motorcycle once again become the fastest in the world. But we'll talk about that a bit later. Let's go back to the early 1920s. The next speed record was set on November 6, 1923. According to other sources, it was 4 days later, on the 10th. The Englishman Claude Temple took a motorcycle frame of his own design and equipped it with a powerful V-twin engine from Anzani with a displacement of 1 liter and 2 overhead camshafts in each cylinder head. And he raced along the Brooklands track, almost flying through the air over the notoriously bumpy circuit. Temple's average speed was 174.58 kilometers per hour. From that moment on, the FIM didn't have to cross the Atlantic to certify motorcycle speed records until the 1950s, when Bonneville became a favorite spot for racers obsessed with ever greater results. The thirst for speed was growing. Already in the next year, 1924, the record was broken twice. On June 8th, Tommy Turner, riding a motorcycle with an 800cc AJS special engine, achieved a result of 178.08 kilometers per hour. And less than a month later, on July 6th, the racer nicknamed the Wizard of Brooklands, also known as Herbert Levac, set a record of 191.5 kilometers per hour on a Bro Superior motorcycle with a JAP engine. All these records took place in Arpajon, France. By the way, Levac was a development engineer at JP Motors, where he came in 1921 from Indian with the idea of creating a superior engine, which he later called the Yankee Killer. The main battle for speed in the second half of the 20s and the 30s would develop between 3 small aristocratic workshops from Britain. These were Bro Superior, Osborne Engineering Company, and Zenith, as well as BMW. It is worth noting that the competition among British high-speed enthusiasts was relatively healthy. Of course, there was envy, resentment, and arrogance, but the successful debut of the BMW motorcycle and the new speed record, set by Ernst Henne in 1929, as well as their continued rivalry in the 30s, only united the British for the prestige of the nation. Moreover, in the 30s, they were opposed not just by Germans, but by Nazi Germany. This was now a struggle of ideologies, played out on the field of speed racing. Herbert Levac's successful run at 191.5 kilometers per hour on the Bro Superior in 1924 infuriated Claude Temple. He considered George Bro, the creator of Bro Superior motorcycles, to be an upstart without proper racing experience. In his thirst for speed, Temple teamed up with Osborne Engineering Company, who had unusual ideas about chassis design and steering systems. The record-breaking OEC motorcycle was equipped with an extremely unusual front fork and frame. In short, this design provided incredible directional stability, and that's exactly what was needed for a straight-line run. On September 5th, 1926, Claude Temple achieved a speed of 195.44 kilometers per hour on this motorcycle. Freddie Barnes, the owner of Zenith Motorcycles, was another British speed enthusiast. While Bro Superior focused on advertising and showmanship, and Temple with OEC were obsessed with complex frame and fork designs, Zenith machines were busy collecting the most gold stars for laps at Brooklands. Zenith had every chance of setting a record, and on August 25, 1928, Owen Morgan Baldwin in Arpajon on a 1-liter Zenith reached a speed of 199.99 kilometers per hour. This was a blow to George Bro's pride. He hires Burt Levac, they fine-tune the engine, and on August 25, 1929, Levac reached a speed of 207.6 kilometers per hour.
0,6 км в час.
What did all this British engineering have in common? They used the excellent JAP engines. The top model was the JAP K-Tour, but even perfection has its limits. And for a large naturally aspirated V-twin, 210 kilometers per hour and about 50 to 55 horsepower were the limit. New solutions were needed. The first prototypes of fairings appeared, improving the aerodynamics of the machines. And to increase power, engines soon began to use forced induction. By the way, a couple of years ago, I released an episode about supercharged motorcycles on my channel. I recommend it to those who are interested. 3 weeks after Burt Levac's new record, the British dominance in absolute records was disrupted by a new player. The Teutonic genius appeared on the scene. On September 19, 1929, Ernst Jakob Henne, on a BMW WR 750, reached a speed of 216.75 kilometers per hour on the track in Ingolstadt, Germany. This was the first successful use of a motorcycle that used a supercharger in the engine to increase power. The debut of the Germans and BMW technology made the British put their quarrels aside in close ranks for payback. Now Temple, Braff, Levac, and others were more willing to cooperate to achieve a shared British success. On August 31, 1930, Joseph Wright in France broke Ernst Henne's record on an OEC Temple JAP motorcycle. He accelerated to 220.99 kilometers per hour. This run is notable because it surpassed Glenn Curtis's unofficial record. It took as many as 23 years to create something faster and two-wheeled than Curtis Viv8. 1930 turned out to be a very eventful year. The Germans were just gaining momentum, and already on September 21st, Henne broke the record, 221.67 kilometers per hour. On November 6th, Joseph Wright in Cork, Ireland, on a Zenith, reached a speed of 242.59 kilometers per hour. The persistence of the British apparently only spurred the Germans on. Moreover, by the mid-30s, the Nazis, who were already in power, had invested huge amounts of money in sports, including auto and motorcycle racing. However, looking at it from this perspective, it cannot be ruled out that the speed demons from Britain also had their own investors. The next 4 motorcycle speed records from 1932 to 1936 belong to BMW. And let's talk about them. A few words should be said about Ernst Henne himself, who was behind the wheel of BMW motorcycles, setting records and earning prestige for the company. Yes, I've already mentioned a couple of times that behind the German records of the 30s stood the power, influence, and money of the NSDAP. But on the other hand, from a racer's perspective, riding the world's fastest motorcycle more than once is a great and bold achievement, and Henne handled it brilliantly. Ernst was born on February 22, 1904. Later, he studied to become a mechanic, and in 1923, he started participating in races. The first motorcycle he raced on was the Magola. This was a unique machine with an engine located in the front wheel, and on this motorcycle, Henne took 3rd place in his first race. The guy had talent. Already in 1926, he became the German champion in the 500cc class, and a year later, in the 750cc class. At that time, BMW had already become the leading motorcycle company in Germany, and Ernst became their best racer. You've already heard about Henne's first and second world records in 1929 and 1930. On November 2, 1932, Henne, riding a BMW WR 750, set a new world record with a speed of 244.4 kilometers per hour. The race took place near the town of Tat in Hungary. Henne would break his own record 2 years later, on October 30, 1934 in Hungary. In the city of Győr, Ernst would post an average speed of 246.23 kilometers per hour. A year later, on September 27, 1935, Ernst Jakob Henne would reach a speed of 256.04 kilometers per hour on the M3 route between Frankfurt and Munich. This was the first run in which a motorcycle accelerated to more than 250 kilometers per hour.
50 км в час.
Ernst Henne set his 4th consecutive record on the same M3 route on October 12, 1936, but this time on a different motorcycle. The WR 750 model with a supercharger had reached its limits, and a new RS 255, also with forced induction, took to the track. Its engine had a displacement of 500cc compared to the 750cc of the previous model, but it was newer, with a more advanced design and greater power. The speed was 272.11 kilometers per hour. You shouldn't see all these records as something happening in a vacuum. Many others tried to surpass Henne's result. First and foremost, the main competitors of the Germans were the British. And on April 19, 1937, the racer Erich Fernihoe managed to do it in the town of Gyon, Hungary. On a Bra Superior motorcycle with a supercharged JAP engine, Erich accelerated to 273.14 kilometers per hour. And here, for example, is the fastest single-cylinder motorcycle of the 30s. This is a special racing machine from the Belgian company Fabrique Nationale, developed by Dougal Marchand. The supercharged 500 could boast a power output of 54 horsepower. In 1934, the racer Milieu reached a speed of 220 kilometers per hour. The next absolute motorcycle speed record was set by the Italians on October 21, 1937. Whether this was a surprise for the Germans and the British is still unclear. However, the School of Motorcycle Engineering in Italy was strong, and by the late 30s, local engineers were also experimenting with supercharging technologies. The racer Piero Taruffi, on a streamlined Gilera motorcycle with a 500cc inline-4 engine, achieved a speed of 274.18 kilometers per hour on the Serenissima track, on the stretch between Brescia and Bergamo. This was a new world record, which stood for 38 days. Ernst Jakob Henne, whom we already know, brought this rivalry of the 30s to a close. On November 28, 1937, on a streamlined supercharged BMW RS 255, he reached a speed of 279.5 kilometers per hour. In the following couple of years, no one was able to surpass this result, and on September 1, 1939, World War II began, and humanity had little time for records. And the result of Henne and BMW would stand until 1951. World War II, of course, affected the holding of various world competitions, and after it ended, even the less affected countries had to spend several years recovering from what had happened. In the United States, the recovery probably happened the fastest. Those who craved adrenaline quickly realized that motorcycles were a good solution to the problem, and professional athletes also continued their pursuit of speed. One of them was Raleigh Free. Yes, the very same person whose record I opened this episode with. Roland set a magnificent record, and in what a way, wearing only swim trunks, shoes, and a helmet, lying on a superb Vincent motorcycle. And this was the U.S. motorcycle speed record, but Free didn't reach Ernst Henne's pre-war result. You know what's most amazing about this story? After the war, the absolute motorcycle speed record will be broken again by the Germans, despite losing the war, post-war devastation, brain drain, and so on. There was a German motorcycle company called NSU. In 1938, its engineers developed a racing motorcycle with an inline 350cc supercharged engine to participate in the Tourist Trophy on the Isle of Man. By 1939, the technology was still quite raw, and there were no victories in the races. After the war, NSU quickly returned to motorcycle production, and several pre-war racing machines were preserved. The company did its best to participate in races as much as possible. Right after World War II, nobody wanted to see Germans at international competitions. Only races within West Germany remained. And while the FIM banned the use of supercharging in motorcycle racing as early as 1946 in Germany, this technology was still widely used until the early 50s. In 1949, building on the experience of creating the pre-war supercharged 350 machine with a 500cc engine was created. An SU racer, Wilhelm Hertz, realizing that a supercharged motorcycle no longer had a place in motorcycle Grand Prix racing, spent about a year convincing the company's management that this 500 equipped with a full fairing designed by Reinhard Faxenfeld could bring fame to the brand by setting absolute speed records. And he finally succeeded. On April 12, 1951, Wilhelm set an absolute speed record of 290.322 kilometers per hour on the streamlined NSU Delphine 1 on the A9 Autobahn between Ingolstadt and Munich. The 500cc bike running on methanol was boosted to 100 horsepower. And that was just the beginning. The record-breaking motorcycle was constantly being improved. Hertz would go on to set records again in 1953, 1954, and 1956. And we will return to his achievements in NSU motorcycles later in the story. To look at the next record, we need to travel to the other side of the world, to New Zealand. And you might have thought that we are going to talk about Burt Munro now, but we'll get to the resident of Invercargill, who spent decades modifying his Indian a bit later. Munro had an equally talented compatriot, also a resident of Invercargill. In 1954, Russell Wright set the New Zealand speed record at 230 kilometers per hour on a Vincent Black Lightning motorcycle. At this event, Russell met Robert Burns. Burns was knowledgeable in aerodynamics and making fairings, and he had a dream to set a speed record on a motorcycle with a sidecar. But Robert didn't have a powerful motorcycle, while Wright did, and this duo made a deal. Burns created the fairing and had the opportunity to use Wright's Vincent Black Lightning motorcycle for his record attempt. In these not-so-high-quality shots, you can see Robert Burns's record attempt. On the Vincent, with a third wheel attached to the side, essentially with a sidecar, in December of '54, he accelerated to 261 kilometers per hour. In 1955, it was Russell Wright's moment of glory. On July 2nd, the FIM registered a new absolute speed record, 297.64 kilometers per hour. The most astonishing thing was that the record was set on a practically standard Vincent motorcycle, except for the fairing. The Black Lightning model was produced in only 31 units. It was a modified version of the Black Shadow model designed for racing. Its naturally aspirated V-twin engine produced 70 horsepower. At the time, it was the fastest production motorcycle. Shortly after Wright's record, the weekly English magazine The Motorcycle awarded him a trophy and a check for £1,000 sterling, which Russell shared with Burns. The prize was presented by Prime Minister Sid Holland on the eve of the pair's departure as honored guests to the London Motorcycle Exhibition. Already in that same year, 1955, there was an attempt to surpass the New Zealander Russell Wright. And now we're about to meet Texas racer Johnny Allen, who is best known for his numerous motorcycle speed records. In 1955, Johnny was riding a streamlined motorcycle, a streamliner called the Texas Cigar. This machine was built by civil aviation pilot John Mancham and by Jack Wilson, a Fort Worth Triumph dealer, tuner, and member of the Motorcycle Hall of Fame since 2001. And the guys built the streamliner after an argument. Usually after the workday ended at the Triumph dealership, a group of regulars would gather to play cards and have a beer. And so, on one of those evenings in 1953, a certain Colonel George Cohn started bragging about the NSU's 1951 record and how no one would ever beat it. The events of World War II were still fresh in everyone's memory, and you can imagine what kind of argument could have broken out at that moment. In short, Colonel Cohn really got under Mankima and Wilson's skin. That same evening, they sketched out a design for a record-breaking motorcycle. In 1954, the first streamliner, called the Devil's Arrow, was built. Practice runs at Bonneville in September of that same year showed the potential for speeds over 260 kilometers per hour, and that was using a standard Triumph 650 twin-cylinder engine running on gasoline. By 1955, the new Texas Cigar racer was ready. The fairing was made of fiberglass, and the frame, welded from chromoly tubes, was designed to allow the installation of engines of various displacements for racing in different classes. For the 500cc class, an engine from the Tiger 100 model was used, and for the higher class, a 650cc engine from the Thunderbird was installed. The engines were naturally aspirated and were almost identical to the stock versions, but to increase their potential, a mixture of gasoline and nitromethane was used as fuel. The Thunderbird engine with this fuel blend produced about 80 horsepower. On September 25, 1955, Johnny Allen achieved a speed of 310.151 kilometers per hour on the Bonneville Salt Flats. It was a new record, but the International Motorcycling Federation did not ratify this result for technical reasons. On the other side of the Atlantic, in Germany, the company that was the first to break the absolute motorcycle speed record after World War II was at the peak of its capabilities and had no intention of losing its prestige. By 1956, the team of riders, technicians, and engineers from NSU, with their prepared motorcycles, went to Bonneville with a firm intention to break a number of speed records. Hertz was riding the flagship racing bike. By 1956, the supercharged 500 had been improved and was now called the Dolphin 3. The engine was already producing 110 horsepower. On August 2, 1956, Wilhelm Hertz accelerated the German machine to a speed of 304.97 kilometers per hour. It was just a little less than the unofficial record of Texan Johnny Allen. But the FIM recognized the result, and that was already a record. But 2 days later, on August 4, Hertz surpassed himself by accelerating the third Dolphin to 338.992 kilometers per hour. This was the first time a motorcycle surpassed the 200 miles per hour mark. Besides Hertz's record, a few more words should be said about other NSU Streamliners. In the early 50s, a talented engineer and part-time racer joined the German company. This cheerful bearded man, Gustav Adolf Baum. Like Hertz a couple of years earlier, he proposed the concept of record-breaking motorcycles. The idea was to position the racer in the vehicle lying on his back, which significantly reduced the height of the machine. If the Dolphin was 104 centimeters tall, then the Baum series was 72 to 75. There were 4 vehicles with a name similar to the engineer's surname. In 52, Baum 1 and 2 were built with 50 and 100 cubic centimeter engines, respectively. A little later, the 125 cubic centimeter Baum 3 and the 250 Baum 4 appeared. These machines hold 11 speed records in their classes. The 50 was eventually accelerated to 196 kilometers per hour. The 100 holds the record at 222 kilometers per hour. The 125 reached 242, and the 250 cubic centimeter, 44 horsepower Baum 4 accelerated to 320 kilometers per hour. However, there was a crash and the record was not counted. The aerodynamics of these Streamliners was phenomenal, which made it possible to use engines that were nowhere near the most powerful. In theory, the 44 horsepower Baum 4 could reach a speed of about 360 kilometers per hour, but that didn't happen. After 56, NSU shut down their expensive record-breaking run program. The Texan Johnny Allen didn't stop trying to speed up the Texas Cigar, and Hertz's record on the NSU wouldn't let him rest. The Streamliner was upgraded and the main improvements were made to the engine. The 650 got a modified head for 2 carburetors. In stock, it had just 1 carburetor. The valves were larger in size. On September 6, 1956, Johnny Allen went out onto the Bonneville Salt Flats. It was still loose after a recent rain, and he accelerated his motorcycle to a speed of 345.188 kilometers per hour. But due to a formality, the record was not recognized by the International Motorcycling Federation, FIM. The formality was that for FIM to recognize a world record, the attempt had to be verified by an official representative of the American Motorcyclist Association. And although there was an AMA representative at the event who was overseeing the record attempts, his authority had expired 3 days before Johnny made his runs. Yes, that's how, due to this absurdity, the record was not recognized by FM. However, Allen's result was recognized at home by the AMA. Johnny, his team, sponsors, and the creators of the Streamliner were incredibly excited. They had beaten the Germans. A bunch of Texans, who spent a total of about $3,500, outdid a German company that spent $1 million on their record program. The reputation of Triumph's engineering grew significantly, and Allen's achievement did not go unnoticed. In 1959, the Triumph Bonneville T120 motorcycle made its public debut. Yes, the name of the Utah Salt Flats became the name of a number of Triumph motorcycle models. And also, the T120 started using 2 carburetors, just like the guys from Texas did. After 1956, the record would not be broken again until 1962. And once again, it would be Triumph machinery, more precisely another Streamliner with an engine and other components from a Triumph motorcycle built by aircraft mechanic Joe Dudek. While working on the machine, Joe was inspired by the X-15 rocket plane. He used an engine from the T120 Bonneville, which was modified. In 1962, Joe, his custom-built motorcycle, rider Bill Johnson, and the support team went to Utah. Using gasoline as fuel, Johnson achieved a speed of 329.9 kilometers per hour. This was the best result after the official record, which was held by Wilhelm Hertz. However, by September 5th, the gasoline had been drained from the tank, the carburetor jets had been replaced, and nitromethane was poured in. Bill Johnson set a new record, 361.41 kilometers per hour. Unfortunately, Joe Dudek's Streamliner was destroyed in a fire in 1974. Triumph Machinery would go on to set one more outright speed record. In front of you is a streamlined motorcycle called the Gyronaut X1. This machine was built by Bob Lepin, Alex Tremulous, and Jim Brufflat, and this story is extremely interesting. By 1959, Bob Lepin was the owner of a Triumph dealership in Detroit. Bob didn't just sell British motorcycles, he was also passionate about drag racing. And among his quarter-mile racing machines, there was one very successful and recognizable vehicle called Cannibal 2. It was a twin-engine monster built by Lepin and his mechanic Jim Brufflat. Cannibal 2 won many races and also gave Bob and Jim the necessary skills in building successful racing machines, refining chassis and engines. But by '62, the potential of the twin-engine drag bike was exhausted. The guys understood that their motorcycle was fast on the quarter mile, but they didn't know its top speed. By '63, Lepin and Brufflat were confident in their abilities to build a record-breaking motorcycle, but they needed a suitable chassis. The guys would find it in California. There, around the same time, another Triumph dealer, Bill Martin, was trying his hand at building a Streamliner and even set a record at the local Triumph Club. The most interesting thing is that Bill Martin's chassis was designed to fit 2 Triumph engines. Bob and Jim bring it to Detroit, install Cannibal engines into the frame, build a fairing, and call the machine Cannibal Mark V. In August of '63, they head to Bonneville, but because of a trailer breakdown while transporting the record-setting motorcycle, they arrived late and were only able to make one timed run. That wasn't enough to set a record. In '63, Alex Tremulous, a talented designer involved in the development of the appearance of several cars and concepts like the Mexico, Seattle, Ate, X1000, Maxima, and the 2-wheeled gyrocar Ford Gyron, was fired from Ford. After being fired, Alex considered starting his own company, and he was also invited to GM. But in an emotional outburst, he decided to build the fastest motorcycle, using his design skills and also applying gyroscopes for stabilization. Tremulous began working on the concepts. Initially, he wanted to equip the 2-wheeled machine with a V8 engine from Ford. And to understand what he would have to face and, in general, what record runs are like, Alex went to Bonneville in '63. It was there that he met the guys from Detroit, and they joined forces with a single goal: to accelerate the motorcycle to a speed that no one had ever achieved before. The name Gyronaut was derived directly from the name of the Ford Gyron prototype. Initially, the Gyronaut was planned to use a V8 engine and gyroscopes. Shelby American sent a race-prepared Fairlane Cobra to the company that produced the chassis for assembly. However, the gyroscopes were never delivered. Several problems with the V8 engine remain. The team decided the following: let's use the already proven and reliable combination of 2 Triumph engines in the first Gyronaut X1, and then we'll see how it goes. The ambitions were incredible. For the X2, they still wanted to install the V8 to achieve speeds over 640 kilometers per hour. And for the X3, they actually wanted to make it go faster than the speed of sound. Assembly and testing of the Gyronaut X1 followed. By 65, the car was ready and was performing at the limit of its speed. The record, however, was set a year later, in 66. Gyronaut X1, with Bob Lepin inside, sped across the Bonneville Salt Flats with an average speed on the measured mile in both directions of 395.363 kilometers per hour. In 1970, the record was lost, and it was during the team's attempts to regain the title that an accident occurred at a speed of about 430 kilometers per hour, which put an end to Gyron's career on the salt tracks. Bob Lepin almost lost his arm and had to undergo numerous surgeries and painful rehabilitation for several years, and there was no longer any talk of creating the Gyronaut X2 or X3. Later, already in the 21st century, the Gyronaut X1 was restored. Triumph's era of dominance was brilliant, but everything comes to an end, and from the beginning of the 70s through the 90s, the competition would revolve around machines with Japanese engines and Harley-Davidson. And I will tell you this story in the next chapter, but before that, let's remember the legendary motorcyclist and record holder from New Zealand, Burt Munro, and his fastest Indian. After all, it was in 1966 when the Gyronaut team was preparing for their run in one of the tents that Burt was somewhere nearby. Ah, there he is, talking to the Gyronaut X1 pilot Bob Lepin. The New Zealander Burt Munro is well known to the vast majority of motorcycle fans, and for good reason. His story and the story of the record on the Indian motorcycle are impressive and inspiring. Burt was born back in 1899. Motorcycles appeared in his life when he was 16, and by the age of 20, he was already conquering speed on the local racetrack. In 1920, at the age of 21, Burt bought that very fateful Indian Scout motorcycle. In stock form, it was a fairly tame motorcycle with a 600cc engine, a 3-speed gearbox, and a top speed of about 90 kilometers per hour. He started modifying his Indian in 1926, and Burt kept doing it for 40 years. He cast pistons, machined valves, gradually increased the engine displacement, and so on, until it culminated in 1967. Munro's official record is 296.259 kilometers per hour. However, during the qualifying run in 66, Burt reached an unofficial speed of 341.2 kilometers per hour. Munro's record has not been broken to this day. His motorcycle, the Indian Munro Special, which he modified for 4 decades, is the fastest naturally aspirated motorcycle with an engine capacity of up to 1,000 cubic centimeters. The efforts and achievements of Burt became the basis for the 2005 film The World's Fastest Indian, starring Anthony Hopkins, as well as an earlier short documentary from 1971, Burt Munro, Offerings to the God of Speed. By the way, both of these films were directed by Roger Donaldson, and both films are excellent. However, there is one inaccuracy in the film, The World's Fastest Indian. For the sake of the story and building up emotions, the film shows as if Munro's trip to Bonneville was his only one. But that's not true. They simply tried to fit the most vivid moments from Munro's life, which are spread out over the years, into one cohesive movie story. In reality, Burt first visited the Salt Flats in Utah back in '57, and before that, he was already actively breaking New Zealand speed records. Realizing that this plain in the US is the mecca of speed, he started preparing specifically for speed runs here. He would arrive at Speed Week in '62, attempting to set a record. And from that moment on, Munro would become a regular at Bonneville, coming every year up to and including '71, and every year testing his strength, trying to get the most out of his motorcycle. In 1975, he made his 14th and final trip to Bonneville as a spectator. And in 2006, this legendary man was inducted into the Motorcycle Hall of Fame of the American Motorcyclist Association. You can learn more about the story of Burt Munro and his Indian motorcycle in a separate video on my channel. Here's a pop-up link to it.
When you're riding a motorcycle across the plains, 5 minutes of your life can be more exciting than some people's entire lifetime. Yes, those are wonderful moments.
From 1970 through the 1990s, the competition will be between machines equipped with Japanese engines and Harley engines. But if you look at it from another perspective, the competition was actually among Americans. Don Vesco, Cal Rayborn, Dave Campus. It's just that some teams preferred domestic engines, meaning Harley-Davidson, while others chose engines from Japanese motorcycle giants. The brands Yamaha, Honda, Suzuki, and Kawasaki themselves did not compete for the absolute motorcycle speed record title. And while earlier, speed was achieved by machines that were not much different from production models, or at least from the racing versions of their time, gradually the lead passed to specially built vehicles. Let's move on to the first record of the 70s. It was achieved by American businessman and motorcycle racer Don Vesco. Vesco would break the absolute motorcycle speed record 3 times in his career, and each time his record surpassed symbolic milestones. The first time, he broke the seemingly insurmountable barrier of 250 miles per hour. The second time, he conquered 300 miles per hour. And the third time, he crossed the threshold of 500 kilometers per hour. But let's go through everything step by step. Accelerating to 200 miles per hour or 320 kilometers per hour was truly an impressive achievement. And for that, an aerodynamic motorcycle was required. Much of what could be done in the field of aerodynamics had already been done. And the proof of that is the Germans at NSU. There, an entire institute worked on reducing the drag coefficient. At the start of the 70s, engine power began climbing again. Don Vesco prepared a streamliner called Big Red for his first record, and he used 2 fierce 2-stroke, 2-cylinder Yamaha engines as the power unit. Each had a displacement of 350 cc from the sports model TR2. In stock, this racing engine produced 54 horsepower, but it's possible that they were modified for Big Red. Unlike the engineering achievements of the leading aerospace company employee Joe Dudek and the experience of the former Ford Motor Company engineer mentioned earlier, Vesco's efforts in creating his streamliner were mainly based on his experience building hot rods. He was born in Southern California, and Don and his brothers were greatly influenced by their father, who built hot rods and streamliners that later raced on the many dry lakes of California. This left a lasting impact on Vesco. In the 60s, he would race Yamaha machines and become a dealer for the company. This is where his love for Yamaha engines comes from, and he also becomes interested in the runs at Bonneville. Big Red, as Don's wife called the motorcycle, was 5.5 meters long and was built around an auxiliary fuel tank from a Grumman F9F Panther fighter from the Korean War era. The Yamaha engines ran on regular gasoline. In 1969, Vesco, during a one-way run at Bonneville on his creation, accelerated to 367 kilometers per hour. He was plagued by handling problems, but his thirst for speed was stronger. On September 17, 1970, he finally broke the coveted 250-mile mark. Don Vesco achieved an average speed in both directions of 409.7 kilometers per hour on his twin-engine Yamaha. This achievement did not come easily. Earlier, Don had survived a crash at a speed of about 380 kilometers per hour, caused by a blown tire. The Big Red was quickly repaired, and 2 weeks later, the record was broken. Thus began a new era of speed records, in which motorcycles with Japanese engines would dominate. Bob Lepin, Alex Tremulous, and Jim Brufflett's team with the Gyronaut X1 had every chance to outdo Vesco. But the accident mentioned earlier happened, and the team was out of the races for good. However, Don understood that his record wouldn't last long, especially since he knew his main rival very well now, as they were friends. Less than a month later, Don Vesco's friend, Kel Rayborn, would break the absolute speed record on a Harley-Davidson. Rayborn had been passionate about motorcycles and racing since he was young. His success in racing allowed him to join the Harley-Davidson factory racing team. He was extremely successful in flat track in the Daytona 200 race. By that time, Harley-Davidson was already feeling significant pressure from Japanese brands as their increasingly powerful motorcycles appeared on the market. A spectacular victory was necessary to maintain their status, and breaking the absolute motorcycle speed record seemed to the company's management to be the most suitable solution. Dick O'Brien, the head of the company's racing division, was put in charge of overseeing the project. By 1970, Dennis Menning had designed and built a streamlined motorcycle for competition at Bonneville. At that time, he was only 24 years old. As Menning himself said, I was 24. I had recently gotten married and was working 3 jobs to support my family and finance the racing program. And I gladly seized the opportunity to become part of the official Harley-Davidson project. O'Brien offered me $10,000 if we set a new world record, and reimbursement for hotel expenses if we didn't. I agreed. And Dennis will come up again in our story, since to this day, that mustached guy continues to build Streamliners. He has made more than 10 of them. He later became the founder and owner of BAB Enterprises, whose Streamliner broke the speed record twice. We'll talk more about Menning later. Let's get back to Harley. The Streamliner was notable because it was a fully factory-developed project in an area that manufacturers usually tried to avoid, at least from the 1960s up to the present day. The heart of the record-breaking Harley was a bored-out 1,480cc engine from the Sportster model, modified by Warner Riley for maximum power. The engine ran on nitromethane. The honor of being the pilot of this torpedo on wheels and attempting to set a record went to the talented factory racer Kel Rayborn. The Harley-Davidson team went to Speed Week at Bonneville in 1970. On October 15th, Rayborn set a new record, 414.8 kilometers per hour, beating Don Vesco's result. But for Kel and the whole team, a margin of just 6.5 kilometers per hour over the previous record wasn't enough. They were thinking, was all our colossal effort, all those sleepless nights in the workshop, really just for these 6.5 kilometers? We need to break the record decisively. The next day, the motorcycle was prepared for the run again. During the southbound run, Kel posted an excellent result. At his peak, he was reaching about 435 kilometers per hour. There was less than an hour left to make a run in the north, the opposite direction. George Smith, Riley's partner, who worked on the engine and carburetor tuning, unscrewed the spark plugs before the second run and noticed metallic deposits on the spark plug of the front cylinder. It wasn't supposed to be like that. George inspects the cylinder and finds a crack at the top of the piston. The team is disappointed, time is running out, and they decide to continue the run. Smith mixes 60% nitromethane, the rest is alcohol. Previously, they raced on 70% nitromethane. He tunes the carb and Rayborn starts. And the modified Sportster engine stalls just a few dozen meters before the end of the measured section. But the speed turned out to be enough. The average on the measured section was 423.7 kilometers per hour in the northern direction, and the average result of the runs in both directions was 427.267 kilometers per hour. It was convincing. Due to the peculiarities of the Streamliner's design, the runs were very difficult for Rayborn. To fit within the design dimensions, the driver had to be almost lying down inside. The front wheel blocked the already limited forward view, so Rayborn used transparent plastic panels on both sides of the wheel to keep track of the black lines marking the edges of the track. During Kel's attempts, crashes were also expected. Once, at a speed of 160 kilometers per hour, the side supports didn't deploy during braking to increase stability. Another time, the Streamliner lost its balance at 250 kilometers per hour. At high speeds, the front wheel kept trying to find its own path. The problem was solved by adding 2 lead weights of 18 kilograms each on either side of the wheel. However, the racer was lucky, and the team was able to quickly repair the machine and make modifications to its design, and they managed to set the record. Do you think Cal Rayborn's racing friend Don Vesco stopped? Not at all. Earlier, you already heard that he holds 3 overall motorcycle speed records, and it's time to talk about the last 2. By the racing season on the Utah Salt Flats in '75, he had prepared a new Streamliner, still maintaining his love for Yamaha engines. The new machine was called Silverbird and was built with sponsorship from Yamaha. Vesco took 2 4-cylinder 2-stroke engines from the Yamaha TZ700, installed them in the frame, and as a result got a total displacement of 1,390 cc and about 240 horsepower. On September 28, '75, Don achieved the cherished speed that many who tried their hand at setting records dreamed of. He broke the 300 miles per hour barrier, and the result was 487.515 kilometers per hour, which is 2.9 miles more than the cherished number. The record will stand until August 28, '78, when Don Vesco himself will break it again. By '78, Don had built an even crazier Streamliner. He called it Lightning Bolt. For this design, Vesco preferred 2 engines from the Kawasaki KZ1000. They installed turbochargers on them. Pulleys were installed on both sides of the crankshafts of both engines, and the 2 engines were connected together with a belt drive. In August 1978, Vesco set a record on the Lightning Bolt, 509.757 kilometers per hour. It was the first time a motorcycle accelerated to more than 500 kilometers per hour. A month later, Don returned to Bonneville again, and during a one-way run showed a result of 536.099 kilometers per hour. However, he was unable to make the run in the opposite direction, and the record was not officially recognized. The result of just over 509 kilometers per hour would stand as the absolute speed record until 1990, that is, for 12 years. After Lightning Bolt, apparently, another streamlined motorcycle followed, into which Vesco installed 2 turbocharged 6-cylinder Kawasaki engines, most likely from the Z1300 model of the early 80s. But this Streamliner was not destined to break the top speed record. Starting from the late 80s, Vesco focused his attention on car speed records. In particular, he is quite well known for his record with the car Turbinator 2. With this wheeled rocket, Vesco in 2018 achieved an average speed of 810.03 kilometers per hour in one of the runs. To this day, it is the fastest car with a mechanical drive from the engine to the wheels. Anything faster uses jet engines. The next motorcycle record was set by the American Dave Campus and a machine with 2 Harley-Davidson engines. The motorcycle was called the Easy Riders Streamliner. David Campus's journey into the world of speed began at a young age when he bought his first Harley-Davidson and took part in races. This early spark ignited a lifelong passion for riding and racing, and for decades, Campus remained devoted to the Harley-Davidson brand. But it was in 1990 at the famous Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah that Campus finally etched his name into the annals of motorcycle history. Back in 1974, Dave joined the prestigious 200-mile-per-hour club, a group of racers who have broken that speed barrier, a rare and revered achievement. The record-breaking motorcycle project began long before 1990. Campus met Bob George, who had already built his first Streamliner. However, Bob lacked the finances. Dave introduced him to Joe Teresi, the owner of JMA Cycle and a partner of Easy Riders magazine. Joe took on the record-breaking motorcycle project, and after a few years, the JMA Streamliner was ready. This motorcycle was not destined to break the record, but in '87, the Easy Riders Streamliner was built based on it. Teresi came up with an interesting way to raise funds for the project. His magazine invited interested readers to take part in achieving a new record. All it took was $25. You would get a branded t-shirt and the sponsors' names would be written on the body of the vehicle. And about 10,000 people who cared responded. After significant changes and modifications made by Kit Raxton, mostly to the engines, the motorcycle was ready. It was equipped with a pair of Raxton Harley-Davidson engines, each with a capacity of 1.5 liters. The Streamliner weighed about 1,100 kilograms. The team went to Bonneville in 1989, where they were supported by the largest audience in the history of record attempts. In the first run, Easy Riders accelerated to 422 kilometers per hour. Then the results approached the mark of 480. Tuesday, September the 26th, 89. Time was running out for the racing team. Bad weather hit the Bonneville Salt Flats. The engines were tuned for an 88% nitromethane mix. In theory, the motorcycle should have gone up to 320 miles per hour, and that would have been a record. However, when Dave entered the checkpoint, the front tire, softened by the strain, blew out, and the speed dropped sharply. Compost dropped out of the race, but the team returned to Bonneville the following year in 1990. The guys found the only front tire rated for that speed. It was a tire made by Firestone in 1967. And the team bought a supply of them for the runs. At the start of the runs, the team suffered a motorcycle crash at a speed of about 400 kilometers per hour. The front wheel failed. It turned out to be poorly balanced. Campus got away with a minor bruise, and the Streamliner, with the help of several sponsors, was urgently repaired in just 3 days. On Saturday, July 14th, 1990, Dave Campus set absolute speed records for AMA and FM, showing an average speed of 518.45 kilometers per hour. And this record is the longest standing among official records. Campus's record was broken by Rocky Robinson on the Top 1 ACK Attack Streamliner on September 3rd, 2006. And then it was broken again by Chris Carr 2 days later. That means Dave's results stood for 16 years. Only Glenn Curtis's unofficial record on the V8 motorcycle lasted longer. And that's where the absolute motorcycle speed records of the 20th century end. In the 21st century, the quest for absolute speed continued, and this period of time, currently a quarter of a century, is notable for the fact that the record will be passed back and forth between two racers and their teams. Naturally, more bikes and teams competed for the title of the fastest motorcycle, but it so happened that only two managed to make their mark in history. These are Rocky Robinson and Chris Carr. And the story of their rivalry reminds me of the fierce competition between the British and the Germans in this field back in the 1930s. Let's start with Rocky Robinson. Rocky was born on March 9, 1961. Like many of the people mentioned in this story, he was captivated by motorcycles and speed in his youth. Robinson later became a professional speedway racer, but in the 2000s he became interested in speed records. And Robinson's 3 absolute speed records would not have been possible if he hadn't met Mike Ikatif. Mike Ikatif is the owner of ACK Technologies, a company specializing in avionics, as well as a motorcycle racer, mechanic, and parts manufacturer. Ikatif first thought about setting a motorcycle speed record in 2002. He allocated a significant portion of his company's manufacturing facilities in Northern California to the design and assembly of the ACK Attack Streamliner and gathered a team of old friends to help build the motorcycle. By 2004, the Streamliner was ready. The motorcycle frame was welded from chromoly tubes, fitted with 2 engines from the legendary Suzuki Hayabusa, boosted by a single Garrett turbocharger, resulting in a total output of around 900 horsepower. Engines producing such high power generate a lot of heat, so Mike and his team implemented a cooling system where the radiator is additionally cooled with dry ice. In these shots, you can see it being loaded into a special compartment. The motorcycle's fairing is also as efficient as possible. Its drag coefficient is only 0.14. The Streamliner weighs 730 kilograms, and its dimensions are as follows. Length is 6.4 meters, height is 81 centimeters, and width is 56 centimeters. They chose tires from the company Mickey Thompson. The first attempts to set the record were made in 2004. That year, the motorcycle was driven by Jimmy Odom. At a speed of 480 kilometers per hour, he was hit by a side wind, which led to an accident. Jimmy wasn't hurt, unlike the Streamliner. By 2005, Attack was restored. In February 2006, the team went to the Lake Gardner area in Australia to try to break the speed record. However, a week before their arrival, a powerful thunderstorm hit the area, and the conditions were not favorable for high speeds. Since they had traveled a long way, the team tried to make a run, but Attack only reached a top speed of 401 kilometers per hour. At the end of August, they went to Bonneville, and on September 3rd, the record was broken. Rocky Robinson, driving the top one Attack, reached a speed of 551.678 kilometers per hour. The 16-year dominance of Dave Campos on the Easy Riders Streamliner came to an end. But Mike Akatiff, Robinson, and the team didn't have long to celebrate. On September 5th, 2 days later, the record was broken by a Streamliner built by Dennis Manning with rider Chris Carr. And now a few words about the BAB-7 Streamliner. In 1976, BAB Enterprises was founded, and since then the name BAB Racing has been firmly associated with two-wheeled torpedoes, while the BAB-7 Streamliner is the 7th record-breaking motorcycle created within this organization. Manning, thanks to his solid experience in the industry, built a truly outstanding Streamliner. The aerodynamic drag coefficient is only 0.08. As Dennis himself says, when shaping the fairing, he was inspired by a salmon he once saw in the Columbia River, capable of accelerating in water up to 80 kilometers per hour. A separate and very important job in designing the engine was done by Joe Harrelson from Sierra Design Engineering. The only ready-made component in this engine is the oil filter. Everything else was made by hand. This is a V4 engine with a cylinder bank angle of 90 degrees and a displacement of 2,997 cubic centimeters. It is equipped with a turbocharger and runs on methanol. The maximum power is 500 horsepower. Goodyear tires are used. The transmission is 4-speed. Want an interesting fact? Usually sport bike riders like to brag about their motorcycles, saying that they can go 180 kilometers per hour in first gear. Well, the BAB-7 Streamliner can reach 305 kilometers per hour in first gear. Chris Carr, a 7-time AMA flat track champion, was chosen as the pilot. On September 5th, 2006, Chris set a new record, 564.693 kilometers per hour. That was 13 kilometers faster than Robinson 2 days earlier. In 2006, Sam Wheeler became a serious competitor to Carr and Robinson. Wheeler had been building Streamliners since the 80s, starting with small displacement engines like the Bultaco 125. By the mid-90s, Sam set out to break Campus's record. By 96, he had a self-built Streamliner, the Easy Hook, supported by Kawasaki and equipped with a naturally aspirated engine from the ZX-11 model. He designed the fairing together with a group of graduate students from Coltech who were studying aerodynamics and doing this as their thesis project. An electrical engineer by profession specializing in electrical testing, Wheeler demonstrated his inventiveness and attention to detail in everything related to his Streamliner. Instead of using a lot of horsepower to achieve speed, Sam tried to achieve maximum all-around efficiency. So, back in the 90s, with an almost stock 160 horsepower ZX-11 engine, he reached a speed of 484 kilometers per hour. And Z-Hook seemed destined to write Wheeler's name in the record book, but due to various problems, those plans were disrupted. In the early 2000s, Wheeler met Terry Kaiser, the owner of Mr. Turbo. They started boosting the power of the ZX-11 engine with a turbocharger, but now they faced reliability issues. The engine couldn't always handle the insane loads. The rear-wheel drive chains also failed, and the tires couldn't withstand the stress. In August 2004, Wheeler finally broke Dave Campus's record by reaching 532 kilometers per hour at Bonneville. However, since the record was set according to SCTA standards, which count the average of 2 one-way runs, and not according to FIM rules, which require the average of 2 runs in opposite directions, Wheeler's result was not officially recognized as a world record. In 2006, Wheeler was determined to improve his result, but the tire problem remained extremely serious. The Goodyear LSR tires used were very rare, and a set was only good for 2 runs at best. For reference, an LSR set cost $120,000 at that time. Wheeler showed the fastest one-way run, accelerating to 571 kilometers per hour, but the front tire came apart on the last measured mile, causing him to fall, fortunately without any serious damage or injuries. This ruined any chance for Robinson and Carr to make a return pass and officially set the record. Wheeler kept trying, gradually improving his motorcycle and fixing issues until the mid-2010s, but the record still eluded him. From 2006 to 2010, Ack-Attack and BUB7 competed 5 times for the title of the fastest motorcycle. On September 26, 2008, Rocky Robinson would reclaim the title of the fastest motorcyclist. His result would be 580.833 kilometers per hour. Manning couldn't tolerate such audacity. A year later, Bub 7 with Chris Carr would break the record again. This time, the speed would be 591.244 kilometers per hour. Mike Ack-Attack and his team also didn't plan to back down. Since their result was beaten, they needed to go faster. 366 days later, on September 25, 2010 Rocky Robinson on the Ack-Attack would show an average speed over a mile stretch in 2-way runs of 605.697 kilometers per hour. At his peak, Robinson reached 633 kilometers per hour. In the pursuit of the land speed record, the Ack-Attack went through a series of unsuccessful attempts, including runs that ended in spectacular crashes. Once Rocky crashed his Streamliner at a speed of 515 kilometers per hour. The vehicle fell on its side and flipped 16 times. Rocky said the following about this accident: "I hit a fairly large patch of loose salt with poor traction. It was like a switch. All the power of the 2 engines burst out, the RPMs shot up, and the rear wheel was spinning. I started sliding like a flat tracker coming out of a turn. The motorcycle leaned to the right, and for a moment I thought I could straighten out. I turned right and actually managed to save myself and bring the Streamliner back to an upright position. By this point, the rear wheel was spinning so fast that after it straightened out, the back end snapped to the right, cracking like a whip. The body caught the salt, which launched Ack-Attack into the air. The impact was so strong that I gripped the handlebars with a death grip. The motorcycle kept catching, lifting, and rolling over and over again. One of the frame tubes, which runs the entire length from the nose tank to the engines, broke off. All of this happened in a matter of seconds, but I still see it in slow motion every time I close my eyes." This absolute speed record, set in 2010, remains unbeaten to this day, and it's now the end of 2025. Rocky Robinson is the fastest motorcyclist in the world, and the top one Ack-Attack is the fastest motorcycle. And now, in a short chapter, here's some information for the most discerning and attentive viewers. At the very beginning of the story, I mentioned the jet-powered 3-wheeled Streamliner and the fact that, at the time of the run, it was recognized as a motorcycle. Meet the spirit of America. It was built in the early 60s by Craig Breedlove. Inspiration comes to people in different ways. For Craig, the trigger was the inaugural speech of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, when he called on Americans to do the following:
"Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country."
Inspired, Breedlove decided to serve his country by striving to become the fastest man on Earth. In the early 60s, he approached a local machine shop owner, Ed Perkins, who gave him space in the shop and $10,000. Craig used this money to buy various spare parts. $500 were spent on acquiring a decommissioned General Electric J-47 turbojet engine from an F-86 fighter. Later, Breedlove received support from Goodyear and Shell. Spirit of America was the first of the modern jet-powered record cars, built with a narrow streamlined fuselage, and most importantly equipped with a turbojet engine. The first tests on the Bonneville Salt Flats took place in 1962. On August 5, 1963, with Craig Breedlove at the wheel, this jet car accelerated to a speed of 655.722 kilometers per hour, making Breedlove the first person to break the 400 miles per hour barrier on land. On October 13, 1964, Craig accelerates to 754.330 kilometers per hour, and 2 days later to 846.961 kilometers per hour. Later, Breedlove would build another Streamliner. It would be called the Spirit of America Sonic 1. Its design would already have 4 wheels to comply with the regulations of that time. In '65, Craig would set 2 records on the Spirit of America Sonic 1. The last and best was 966.574 kilometers per hour, and this would be the first jet-powered land vehicle record recognized by the FIA, the International Automobile Association. And let's move on to the details of the regulations and classification. At the time the Spirit of America was created, the rules of the International Automobile Federation, the FIA, required 4 wheels to set a land speed record. Thus, Breedlove's records from '63 and '64 were not recognized by the FIA. However, the International Motorcycling Federation, the FIM, recognized them, classifying the Spirit as a motorcycle. Also, the FIA rules described a car as a vehicle not only with 4 wheels, but also driven by wheels. That is, the engine's power had to be mechanically transmitted to the wheels. But in the Spirit of America, as in other record-breaking cars and motorcycles with jet engines, all the wheels spin freely. And only the last record of the 4-wheeled Spirit Sonic 1 on November 15, 1965 was recognized by the FIA, paving the way for jet-powered land vehicles. It took 2 years for the Automobile Association to revise the regulations. But at the time in '64, the main serious question raised was which category to assign the car to, and it was the number of wheels that became the reason the record was recognized specifically by the FIM. The fastest 3-wheeled car in history was the Streamliner CMI Motivator, equipped with a hybrid rocket engine, Ramatech V4, which combined liquid and solid fuel to produce 48,000 horsepower. It was also supplemented by a booster unit with a Sidewinder rocket motor with 12,900 horsepower. Stan Barrett, in 1979, accelerated the Motivator on the surface of the dried-up Muroc Lake to 976 kilometers per hour in 12 seconds, using the main engine and activating the booster. This allowed him to reach a momentary speed of 1,190.377 kilometers per hour, just shy of the speed of sound. The result was recorded by the high-precision radar of the nearby Edwards Air Force Base and by the team's onboard computer telemetry equipment, but there was no official record. First of all, the runs on Muroc Lake are done in a one-way format. Secondly, for the record to be recognized, the speed attempt must be made under the jurisdiction of the FIA or under the jurisdiction of an appointed agent. Moreover, the attempt must be 2-way within an hour over the same stretch of land. None of these conditions were met. Nowadays, this Streamliner is on display at the Smithsonian Institution. And also, 3 years earlier, on June 12, '76, Kitty O'Neill, a deaf racer and stuntwoman, on the CMI Motivator in the Alvord Desert, reached a speed of 843.323 kilometers per hour, the average speed over 2 runs in both directions. This made Kitty O'Neill the fastest woman in the world. Her record was surpassed by another woman only in 2019. At the end of the control section, when Kitty turned off the engine, She was racing at 994 kilometers per hour, and during the run, the engine was only producing 60% of its power. In an interview after the run, Kitty said the following about her deafness. "My condition helps me feel the vibrations better and allows me not to be distracted by noise. I can concentrate better, and I feel more emotionally balanced." It's also worth saying a bit about the flip side of this record. In 1976, William Frederick completed the construction of the jet car SMI Motivator, which was designed to break the sound barrier on land. Suffering from a severe lack of funds, he sold the exclusive right to race it for $50,000 to 2 drivers and stuntmen. Kitty O'Neill, she invested $20,000, and Henry Neetham, his share was $30,000. Kitty was ready for more runs and intended to break the 1,000 kilometers per hour average speed barrier, and the jet Streamliner made it possible. However, Neetham and other sponsors of the jet record car pressured Frederick to stop Kitty's runs. The formal reason was supposedly Frederick's disregard for the terms of the contract with Neetham. The contracts were worded so that Kitty was given the exclusive right to break the women's speed record, and Neetham the men's. In fact, the main sponsors of the project decided that it was inappropriate for a woman to be the fastest person on Earth. Under the threat of a lawsuit from Neetham and the loss of his funding, Frederick literally pulled Kitty out of the ready-to-launch car at the very last moment before the start and removed her from the races. That's how it went. It turned out to be a rather shady and unpleasant story.
Incredible power, Chuck Yeager. Yeah, Ken, he's smoking along at a pretty good rate.
And sometimes, in the field of setting records, there are cases of sabotage. And one of these is connected with CMI Motivator. In 1977, Neetham made an attempt to set a record. During the third run, all 3 brake parachutes failed to deploy, and the car plowed through the sand for hundreds of meters, suffering severe damage. As it turned out, acid had been poured into the parachute containers for the runs by an employee of the company that made them, at the behest of and for money from one of the competing record teams. Since 1965, jet-powered Streamliners, including 3-wheelers, have been classified as cars, and their records are regulated and recorded by the FIA. But at that particular moment, the FIM recognized the Spirit of America as a motorcycle, which meant that the speed of 846.961 kilometers per hour was officially recognized. These are the nuances of classification. People may have different opinions about these 3-wheeled rockets and their records. In any case, achieving such tremendous speed takes a lot of courage, risk, and luck. Yes, 3 wheels provide greater stability and a certain advantage for reaching higher speeds. And in my humble opinion, you can't lump together the results of 2-wheeled and 3-wheeled vehicles. In fact, the FIA already ruled on this back in '65. As of the time I'm working on this story, September-October 2025, the fastest motorcycle in the world with mechanical power transmission from the engine to the wheels remains the top one, Ack Attack, piloted by Rocky Robinson, with a result of 605.697 kilometers per hour. The record was set in 2010 and has stood for 15 years. In our present day, and actually even a bit earlier, the coveted number for speed demons has become 400 miles per hour. This is a symbolic milestone, which is approximately equal to 640 kilometers per hour. A person who conquers it on 2 wheels will forever go down in history. But on the way to achieving the highest possible speeds, racers, engineers, and teams face a lot of challenges that need to be solved. For the last 50 years, Streamliner motorcycles have had little in common with their civilian counterparts. These are essentially wheeled rockets, twin turbocharged engines, a long wheelbase, retractable outriggers, parachutes, and a fairing design on par with the best examples of the aerospace industry. The days are long gone when records were set by enthusiasts, lone individuals, or small teams obsessed with speed, working with minimal budgets, a good motorcycle, and a fire in their hearts. Modern record attempts are extremely expensive, and every extra kilometer per hour comes with tremendous effort. perfect aerodynamics and a more powerful engine don't guarantee success. Limiting factors are often crosswinds, the condition of the track surface, the strength limit of the tires, and so on. After 2010, there were attempts to break Rocky Robinson's record, and even the ACK Attack team itself tried to improve their result. In 2016, Guy Martin, the well-known charismatic competitor in the Isle of Man Tourist Trophy, took part in runs on the Triumph N4 Rocket Streamliner motorcycle, which, by the way, was built by Dennis Manning. Guy reached a speed of 444.7 kilometers per hour, making this machine the fastest Triumph in history. But it was still far from the absolute record. From 2017 to 2024, a number of teams tried their luck. Some of them even suggested alternative locations for the races. For example, the Uyuni Salt Flat in Bolivia is being considered for this purpose. In particular, in August 2017, Mike Akatif brought the ACK Attack motorcycle there to try to set a new record. As of 2025, American racer Chris Rivas, an experienced motorcycle drag racer, announced his attempt to reach 400 miles per hour at the Bonneville Motorcycle Speed Trials. They took place from August 23rd to 28th. Ambitious. Maybe Chris is so confident in his abilities because he's riding the BAB7 Streamliner, which was created by the legendary Dennis Manning? However, the weather in 2025 wasn't very favorable for this event, and a number of participants were not able to fully show their potential and the potential of their machines. Among them was Chris Rivas. As of August 28, 2025, Robinson's record on the ACK Attack from 2010 still stands. Chris says that the 400-mile mark is his goal, but he's not in a hurry, and the main thing at this event is safety. And Manning's motives are quite easy to understand. He is obsessed with the record and says the following: "I have dedicated my whole life to this. For me, it's not about speed, it's about the record. It doesn't matter how fast you are, you have to go faster. This isn't a race. You're trying to set a record and there's no second place. Either you have it or you don't." The history of absolute speed records on motorcycles has come a long way. From 60 kilometers per hour on a steam-powered bicycle, which ended with a heart attack and death, to 605 kilometers per hour on a super-powerful, high-tech, cigar-shaped vehicle. Only time will tell what top speeds motorcyclists will reach in the future. It's quite possible that in the next few years, we'll see the 400-mile-per-hour mark broken. Or maybe the process will take decades. Write what you think about this. And at this point, my brief overview comes to an end. Naturally, we've only looked at absolute speed records, and to be honest, rather superficially. But there are records in various categories and disciplines, and a whole bunch of interesting stories and events as well. Thank you for your attention. Supporting my work isn't that hard. Share this story with your friends and acquaintances. Also, leave a like and write a comment so that YouTube recommends it more often. You can support with a donation using the details pinned in the description. This was Krasmodo Channel. See you next time.